I still work technically as a software engineer, but at this company today, I act more of the advisor and help other teams understand where they need to be, what they need to be doing, and offering my kind of like cross of the technical expertise and my knowledge about organization development and adult development, help the team succeed and help individuals succeed in Google. And that's what I do. And it's fun and it's fascinating and probably the most interesting thing that I've ever done. But that seems to be always the case with me. Whatever I'm doing right now is the most interesting thing that I've ever done. Like right now, this is probably the most interesting thing that I've ever done, talking to people in South Africa, which is like so weird in at Google. We got, yeah, I have a talk to London. Okay, I'm going to talk to Japan. And then it's like, I'm going to talk to South Africa. And people are like, what's in South Africa? It's like, it's going to be a conversation. So this is here we are. I thought I would give you a brief rehash. Let's just say like maybe like a small performance of a elemental polarities slide deck that I shared at one of the conferences earlier this year. And I could have just sent you a link to a video to it, but we're very lucky in that the person who was supposed to hit record button on Zoom, Julia, like you did just now, forgot to do that. So there is no recording of this. So it might as well be the first performance ever. So this is always wonderful, right? And I think, do you mind if I share a screen?
Yes.
Can you make me a co-host?
Yes.
And it's sort of like meant to be a very short presentation. And I thought, and I tried to pick a topic that is not necessarily technology, that is not necessarily adult development, but rather it's a framework that I've been working on maybe 3 years ago now, and I have gotten stuck with it, and I don't know what to do with it next. And so I thought if I share it with you, maybe you will find some interesting ways out of this stuckness, and see maybe do something with it. So here it is. Can you see my little slide? Is everything? Are we presenting correctly?
Yes, perfect.
All right. All right. So it's obviously a really cool framework that is incomplete, and let's see. I call it 4NF because that's the cool name for it, 4 needs framework. And the way this is going to go is fairly quickly. First, I'm going to try to set the stage, which is what I'm doing now. And then we're going to settle into this mode of kind of feeling things rather than like trying to analyze things, but try to just sense in what's happening and just try to hear my words and try to get into that space of like, here's what's happening within me. Here's how I understand. Here's how I perceive this. And then we'll do a little bit of analytical understanding of the framework. And then we can do whatever we please, right? Actually, we can do whatever we please anytime we want. But hopefully this is the steps we'll take. And so it's really a lens. It doesn't mean to be super accurate or like really like, oh, this is how the world works. It's more like a, hey, maybe there's some interesting stuff that's happening inside of it. And it's more like a kind of seems like tool. This is one of the reasons why I want to share this with you, is because I found it fairly useful as this very vague tool, but I can't seem to be able to put it in a place where it's like a book or like a really useful article that people like, oh yeah, I'm going to publish it in this what's the Harvard Business Review, and suddenly people will start using it everywhere type of thing. And so what I'd like for you to do is suspend a little bit of skepticism for a minute. You ready? Do you have your suspend button for the skepticism? And just squint a tiny bit and just kind of look at it a little bit and see if we can find some interesting new things that will arise around this type of ideas. And maybe at the very least, we'll just have a little bit fun doing this. Are you all ready? Is everybody ready? Yay. All right. So the framework itself has this notion of needs intention. And there's this big idea that we are, as adults or as humans, have this fundamental needs, underlying forces that animate all human systems. And there's only a few of those needs, but they exist. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of look at some of these needs, and I'm going to bring a little bit of a kind of like a framing how I'm going to deliver this. First, I'm going to talk about this, how we express it, how the kind of words we use, what kind of context we use this, and then we'll talk about how we perceive this in terms of cravings and aversions. What we would like more, what we would like less of it. And so it's going to be really, really fun. So I'm going to start with the need for agency, which is the need that I could probably pick the first one for some reason, maybe. But if you're recognizing them at tab 4, maybe there's like a coded message there, or maybe not. Maybe this is totally random, or maybe because it's alphabetically A. So just figure out something there. So need for agency. The need, the way I kind of define it is this need of to have well-defined boundaries. When we talk about it in people, we have this idea of sense of wanting to retain our unique beauty, our selfness, and move toward firmer boundary in organizations, find some way to differentiate from other similar organizations, competitive advantage, right? Durable, power, those types of things come up to mind. And when we talk about the need for agency being expressed, we would usually talk about be myself, make our own path, what's our value proposition, unique value proposition, or what makes me, me. And typically the way we use the words here, both good and bad, is unique, different, runaway, unconventional, loner, autonomous, pioneer, siloed also. Um, and so when we crave the need for agency, we typically have this sense of wanting more freedom, more liberty, self-determination, more capacity to plot one's own path, our own paths. And when we experience aversion to the need of agency, or especially in others, we would probably experience it as like seeing somebody's being uncooperative, difficult, ornery, stubborn, isolated, hard to work with, those types of people. You know those people, right? You've
Not us.
been that way years. Okay, I got you. I understand. And so I'm going to then dive into the other need that I also would like to highlight, the need for belonging. And so again, try to sense what I'm trying to tell you, trying to have it and experience it almost in the moment. And the need to be connected, the need to be loved, respected, included by my group, be understood, or by organizations. Organizations can experience this as like, hey, how do we fit into the larger org? How do we do good in the world, right? How do we deliver net positive value? So something about the value statement of fitting into the larger context of things. And then when we talk about it, we say, we're a team. How do I fit in? Who are my people? What is being asked for us? When a team comes in and says, what is our mandate? I was like, oh, I know what you're experiencing. You're asking for somebody to tell you what to do. And it means that you're kind of looking to find your place, you fit your thing in the universe. And the words we typically use when we express that need is community, togetherness, compliance, teamwork, tribe, sometimes respect, unity. When we crave this need, we have this sense of wanting to be accepted, right? To be seen, understood, not to be left or excluded, left alone, left out. And when we experience disdain or sort of like a craving or aversion to this need, it's like typically we talk about the person being needy, over accommodation, conformism, or tribalism, and all these things start popping up for you, right? Are you kind of feeling it? Are you sensing the aversion to the need for belonging? You with me? You there?
Mm.
Hard to know. Like if you were in the room, I'd be able to look in your eyes. I'm like looking at the screen light on the camera, and it's very hard to know what's going on there. And so I'm going to
Yeah.
now look at this needs intention. And the interesting thing is that if we are craving the need for agency, we have this idea of being free to be as we please. And then yet it's this notion of being alone, all by ourselves. And at the same time, when we experience the need for belonging, we have this idea of being connected like fingers of a hand. but we are controlled by the hand. And so there's this tension between these two needs suddenly emerges that, which one is the right one? Which one do I pick? If any of you study polarities, you probably would notice that it's a polarity that I'm describing. And typically when you kind of hear a need for agency and belonging coming in tension, you will hear like statements like, I can't just behave like everyone else. Or how can I be myself in this team culture? This org is just doing whatever they want and not actually what's being asked for them. Or I feel like I can't do anything without running into obstacles. And so these types of this tension, like if this is not something you've experienced today, it's the end of the day for you, right? If, it's probably going to be surprising because this is a very common tension that we experience as humans, is trying to balance between my own sense of agency, my own sense of actions, my own sense of uniqueness, and then how do I fit in and how do I experience it in relation to others, myself in relation to others. So I'm going to jump into another pair of needs, and this one is going to be the need for safety. Need for safety is a very, very fundamental and very important and very primitive and something that emerges in us without even thinking. It's the need to continue to exist. In people, we feel like they need to be safe, content, comfortable, knowing what happens next. In organization, it's usually what's our clear, unassailable advantage? How do we be stable, predictable business? How is our business model something that will supply us for generations? And it typically will express by, when we express it, we typically ask ourselves, like, will I get hurt? Or we must survive, or we lay foundation for infrastructure and to anticipate everything, right? And the words we typically use in this, when we express this need, is to use words like predictability, coherence, legibility, stability, certainty, at home, permanent, supportive, consolidated, well defended. And so these types of things are like very, very clearly part of this notion of the need for safety. When we crave this need for safety, we want protection, we want to have capacity to defend ourselves, desire to protect and react appropriately to any external circumstance. And when we experience the aversion to it, usually again in other people, we see it as the sense of inflexibility, decay, obsolescence, boredom, and resistance to change. And so when we experience this need, there is also another need that pops out, and I'm going to draw a parallel or a tension between them in a few minutes, but think about it this one. It's the need for purpose. And the need for purpose is to last beyond our existence, to matter, to be remembered, to reach beyond one's horizon. In organizations, you can hear it as to transform the industry, make lasting impact, paradigm shift. And that need of purpose typically expressed by people as, why am I here? Or time to take what's ours, seize the opportunity, seize the day, right? Is there all there is? Is this all there is? And the words we typically use is change, hope, revolution, delivering, achievement, growth, development, right? Outreach, destiny, challenge, expansion. And if we, again, sense this need, when we crave it, we will have this sense of dissatisfaction, impatience, restlessness, desire to do something, change the circumstances, go somewhere, just jump out and do something. Have you ever taken a vacation on a whim? That might be a need for purpose acting out. When we haven't experienced an aversion to it, we're usually experiences that seeing something as risky, unwise, not well thought out, just stupid. Like, oh, what are they doing? This is too risky, too crazy. What is happening here? And so when these needs come in tension, it's very, very pronounced, because on one hand, you kind of want to be locked down and very stable and secure. And at the same time, it's very clear that this state will take you to the place where you're just ossified, right? And then when you're experiencing the need for purpose, it's bravely exploring, moving forward, thinking big, taking risks, and risking everything, right? And so again, these two needs come in this really interesting tension that you kind of can experience almost just by me talking about this. And if you've not experienced this today, I would be very surprised, because everything we do is a risk. And like, especially, with the pandemic, one of the interesting things that we've experienced is this really kind of radical way of presenting of risk being presented to us, and saying like, do I do this, or do I risk getting sick, or maybe possibly die? But that's what I want to do, but that will make me unsafe. And so what that tension right there is the tension between um, uh, safety and and purpose. And so when we experienced this tension, I decided to bring the big guns here, and I decided to get Schopenhauer to talk for me. And he has this amazing quote that says, "Life swings like a pendulum, backward and forward between pain and boredom." There it is. That's the experience of the polarity. Um, and James Hollis is one of my favorite authors. Also talk about how we need to remember that these twin agendas of progression versus regression war within us each day. And so here you go. Then we're going to build a 2x2, right? Because every organization development buddy has to build a 2x2 at some point during the presentation. If we didn't, critical. Like, what kind of slide deck is it going to be?
Yeah.
And so I actually say it again.
You're only professional if you can produce one of these, Dimitri.
Exactly. This is how you know. And so it's this. I prefer to think of it as a thinking space, but we'll talk about this in a minute.
Yeah.
And so now I'm going to chat a little bit about this idea of existential anxieties.
Yay!
Existential anxieties, because we have to think about anxieties a little bit, and the interesting thing that arises out of the tension of polarity is this notion that even if I'm completely safe and I'm happy in the moment, there's a pull of purpose that you always experience because it's always there. And immediately as the pull of purpose is experienced, there's also a counterfactual, right? It always goes like, but what if I wasn't safe? And so if you kind of think about existential anxiety in the framing of the fundamental needs, we can think of this as the fear of potentiality, that a fundamental need is unsatisfiable. In other words, given that I have, for example, the need for purpose, and it's always pulling in one direction, that means I'll never be fully safe, because there's always be a crappy, need for purpose always yanking me around, and vice versa. Given that I always want to be safe, I always will worry, is this all there is? Will I just overcomfort myself? And so there's this really weird anxieties that just that mirror these polarities or these needs that rise out. And I call them not agency, not belonging, not safety, and not purpose. And so it's like, what if I didn't have that particular need? And so the interesting thing that emerges here is we're continuously experiencing this really weird tug and pull. First, we experience not agency, and then immediately not belonging pulls us. And then we go not safety, and then not purpose pulls us. And I didn't illustrate it all perfectly. And both axes happen at the same time. And most of the time, if you were imagining your existence in this framework, it's this continuous pull and tug, pull and tug, pull and tug. And what's interesting is that over time, as I was exploring this, I found that there's fairly interesting somatic markers that I associate with each of the quadrants. So when I feel the need for not safety, or for the need for safety expressed as an existential anxiety of not safety, it usually comes across as this kind of dreading and what we call typically angst and anxiety. The not belonging comes across as shame, and so the cheeks get red or ears get red, and I go like, oh, I messed up. Not purpose is for me a sense of depression. Like if it's really big dark bear, if it start hugging me, I was like, oh, I know what's happening. I know what need is experiencing. I'm experiencing. Right? I know what anxiety I'm experiencing now. There is a sense of a lack of a deficit, or the prediction of unsatisfiability of the need for purpose. And not agency For me, it's experienced as typically a sense of fuming, steaming anger. And whenever I'm not given what I want, or what I believe what somebody's in my way, I have it, and it's right there. And so for my own personal self-development, this framework was primarily a way for me to kind of cope with this somatic markers and just try to understand where I am. It might be different for you. You might have different ones, but establishing these has been actually fundamental for my kind of breakthroughs and my own understanding of myself, because it allowed me to move from something that's very visceral and very physical and very much like in my body, to something that I can now think about and kind of elevate myself to a plane. And instead of just experiencing it as a physical embodied emotion, I can now kind of blend into a little bit of more of a thinking. And I also noticed that organizations have them too. So organizations, typically the mood of the organization very accurately reflects of what experience, what anxiety they're experiencing currently. And so that also helps me in the organization, because if I walk in, well, I don't walk into rooms anymore, but if I walk into a call and I hear the vibe and I go like, oh, I think this might be really helpful. This is what might be really helpful, this team to kind of shake loose a little bit. Let's move on to the framework. Are y'all with me? How's it going so far? Everybody asleep?
No,
All
it's
right.
beautiful. Dimitri, it's just beautiful. What I particularly like is the coherent follow through. I mean, of course, I absolutely adore the existential thing, but to put it in somatic experiences, that I just think it's incredibly beautiful.
Thank you.
Can I add? Can I add, because there's something here going on around some of the really core existential theory as well. So there's a guy called Irvin Yalom, who many will have heard of, who has this idea of the four givens of existence, and your four points here map almost beautifully neatly onto those. So I mean, they're freedom, isolation, death, and meaning are Yalom's four. And you can see meaning mapping to purpose, belonging mapping to isolation, safety and death, and agency and freedom. It's absolutely incredible. But you've taken it a stage further because you've put in the polarities. And so actually you're capturing the human mess that is oscillation between all of these things. I think it's brilliant.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate this. Maybe there's something there then. And
maybe.
So the interesting thing that I built out here is the framework itself used the polarities in the 2x2 not as the 2x2 is typically the fourth quadrant is the best one, right? You know that one, right? This one is it's more of a thinking space where it's really a coordinate space where we kind of imagine a character in a story. And it's all based around the story, right? I have an exercise, if you're interested, where I mapped out Luke Skywalker's fight with his father as the story of the setting. It's lacking details. I probably need to publish it at some point, but it's basically a story in the map of the story. And so we have a character in this thing, and in this thinking space, a character is in this coordinate system. And so horizontal axis, you basically kind of like go and say, where are you in your belonging or agency polarity? Which need or which anxiety is tugging you forth the most? And so you have vertical axis, which is, which purpose or safety takes you, and which creates you, gives you like this sense of like you can now do extent a little bit or a lot. Purpose is, or not purpose is pushing you a lot forward out. And so then you can have these extremes where purpose and belonging is like, I'll give up my life for my tribe, right? This is like the ultimate belonging, right? The ultimate expression of belonging and purpose and risk. And then you have the other one where it's like fight for your life type of thing. And then you have the Midlands, obviously, where you can express this your kind of the story that you tell yourself, or the character is experiencing in this kind of like a somewhere in the middle, just not quite in the center. And then of course kind of what is interesting about this thing is that just like with any polarity is that unattainable center, right? That center that doesn't exist, which is perfect stillness, where all the needs are perfectly satisfied. You're exactly where you need to be, and you're exactly, in the perfect state of paradise and heaven and things like this. And so typically in this space now, you can see that you can find yourself as like, here's where I am. And so this was really helpful for my self-work, is like, if I understand where I am in this thing, I know where I need to go, because I need to, the center is where we're all trying to reach. And then, obviously there's the movement, and the movement typically is powered by the existential anxieties. And then, at some point, you look at yourself and you go, how did I get in this space? And how did I get here? And so the story is like this. You're basically moving around in a weird space, but the mapping of the story and just speaking through the story might be really useful. The place where it really helps me with outside of my own self-work was having this conversation with a manager, with managers of teams, and trying to help them map where they feel like the organizations are versus where they are. So it's two characters in the story, and helping them understand. For example, one of the most interesting aha moments is that when I, as a manager, want to make my organization go into this full-on belonging and purpose mode, I'm tripping existential anxiety of my reports, of my team, because they're going to talk the other way. They're actually going to say like, oh, we don't want to be part of this cult. We actually want to, because they want to express the opposite need. And so the tug and pull of anxiety is super important, because you need to not only understand where you want to go, you also need to understand where the team wants to go and where the team is currently. So if the team is experiencing this not agency, not safety all the way out, I don't know if you can see my cursor or not. Can you see my cursor?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
oh, hang on. Oh, there you go. If the team is all the way over here, right? And you trying to go like, we'll go here and things, that's going to really, really not work for you, because all you're going to do is just get them further out into the space of, because you're literally tugging at the opposite of the polarity. So maybe there's some way of going this way that allows you to go and say, hey, yes, you're really, really caring about safety. You're not feeling safe, but the thing that is happening in the team where everybody's for their own is just not going to work for us. So how can we move toward a little bit more, sense of community, sense of, sharing responsibilities and things like this. And so that's been a fairly actually helpful application of the thing.
Can I
Anyway,
interrupt? So when you,
yes, please.
sorry, and I just find this really interesting and I know it's a bit sort of formulaic, but like as a formula for working with a team, what I'm hearing you say is when you fall in a certain square, there's two aspects of that square. If you want to move them into another square, the strategy is to shift one of those aspects. So you shift safety, and somehow that kind of oblique move pops you out of the right hole. I find that really useful.
Yeah.
If that is what
To be honest with you, I don't have I wish I had a really good methodology here. I did not find that it's always the case, but it's kind of this really weird sense of intuition that like even just having that conversation creates a space for like, oh, I think I understand what's happening. And sometimes it's because the polarities are always in movement. Sometimes the team might be right here, but they're ready to go. They're ready to go here. It's just they're waiting for that trigger to go other way, because the polarities always shift. And so this is where I'm like, I was stuck with the framework, because there's a framework for thinking and just trying to help me understand what's happening. It's beautiful. As a formulaic framework for like, hey, here's some interesting moves that you can do. Not interesting. I'm not quite there yet.
Yeah.
And maybe never be.
Lee,
So Dimitri, can I also ask a quick question, please?
Go for it. Go for it.
Thank you. I'm seeing some quite interesting threads and correlations with Google's project Aristotle. Is that something that you're aware of? And yeah, I'd just love to hear how you see that.
Yeah, Aristotle has informed a lot of thinking. Actually, I think from the Aristotle was a defining moment in Google's corporate culture because it made some of the things that we previously have not been seeing or considering at all now visible, and things like psychological safety, for example, was a word that like emerged out of these types of things. And the way it helps me is that it allows me to map the coordinate space a little bit better. So one of the weird things about subject-object shift is that you don't know it until you know it, and once you know it, it's hard to not know it. And that's what Aristotle had done. Is like suddenly I can talk about those things without having to go and say, okay, let me spend an hour deploying a shared mental model state. And help you understand what I mean by when I say safety. And so that part has been incredibly helpful. But it preceded my engagement in this. So I was a consumer of this project rather than a participant in it. And I think at this point, there's really not many slides left, and I'm just going to like leave it open. I think the discussion has broken out, and that's beautiful. Let's go for it.
The discussion.
More questions? Maybe you know, if here's a conversation prompt, or if you want a different conversation prompt, it's up to you. Any riffs you would like to do, and add a guitar lick to this thing, or a bass line, I would be fine with that too. Anything that comes up for you. Oh, did I ruin the mood? You know, everybody's in. You know,
I think, yeah. So I'm processing at double speed, Dimitri, and very appreciative of what you've shared. I think the one initial thought into how my developmental stages show up in this framework. So the first has to do with maybe different methodologies for resolving the tension. So that might be one way in which it links to that. And I'm still thinking about examples, but there's maybe ways in which I might opt into and out of group, or may go for synthesizing into a more complex reality, or actually falling back into a simpler version in which that thing didn't exist. So there's something about the way in which we resolve the paradox, the polarities through movement. That's the one that shows up for me. I think the other thing has to do with potentially, but once again, I have to think this through more clearly. Maybe stages that follow on each other are different attempts at resolving. So in a kind of conforming group-based stage, I might be resolving that by elevating my sense of safety and even agency as expressed in more of a technical expert, something like that. So I'm resolving things in ever more complex ways, moving around. I don't know. Yeah. So those are some of my thoughts.
Yeah, this is actually parallel. It's really funny because I had the slide right next to it, where my initial reaction was that it seems like there's some interesting spaces where we visit the spaces all the time, all of them, but we situate and discover those spaces and cherish them at different stages differently. And so that might be an interesting way to think about it, is that like we, an opportunist might be over indexing on agency and safety, and diplomat is like, oh wow, we're going to shift on this side of this thing, and that's where I'm going to live most of the time. The other question is, I have tried, and I have not been able to map Enneagram onto this thing, because it seems like I, as a type 4, spend a lot of times in a certain area, and I just reside and I dwell on those areas, and it's like there's a gravity pull that just kind of moves me in a certain area and just makes me sit in this area. And not agency is like one of the most fundamental thing for me. It's like it is death. It's like, for me, it's very, very hard. And for others, it might be, for other types, it might be another one that is an extra gravity. It's like a slanted floor type situation. So that might be an interesting thing.
Have you thought about working with the instincts in terms of that? Because maybe instinctual preferences and instinctual suppressions will tell you where people hang in what sequence, maybe even a sequencing of preferences in some way.
That's really neat. No, I have not thought about that, but that is really, really neat.
Yeah. So I would postulate from that my low self-preservation keeps me from spending too much time in safety. And from there, it might follow as a thought pattern, but I'm not sure. I'd have to think about it some more too.
I'm wondering, Karen, you go.
I was going to say, Lucille, I think I was on the same wavelength as you there, having a look at how the instincts stack. But I think for me, the problem with the model is that it's not, two-dimensional, because the polarities that you've got here, there are also other tensions. So there might be tensions between agency and purpose, and there might be tensions between safety and belonging. So it's almost a three-dimensional model, or it's a completely one-dimensional set of models. So I'm not so sure that, I think that maybe the stuckness is coming in trying to represent it in a two-dimensional structure when there's more facets to it than the two-dimensional structure.
Focusing on two relationships as opposed to the complexity of the multiplicity of relationships that exist within the model.
Yeah, it's in Einstein style, the time warp continuum, it starts warping into itself instead of being straight up, two-dimensional thing. I love it. That's beautiful. That's really cool.
I was sort of wondering if the conventional and post-conventional maps would be different. And less kind of contained, because the paradoxes are more integrated, and perhaps the sort of purple would stretch over the middle point a little bit more.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I've noticed, like, when I tried to apply it, especially with other folks, the thing that was interesting is that it starts a conversation, but it does not seem to be like when you said like multidimensional, that's what rang, because it immediately goes into something else, because it almost feels like, yeah, this is a nice beginner, like, let's situate a little bit, and then it's like, but it's actually more complex, and it's okay, it's fine, we move on and we're productive. But it's almost like a not the existing, not the thing that you just stay with all the time. It's like a starter framework. It's a yeast rather than anything else.
Dimitri, the only person I know that would ever talk about a framework as a yeast. I love it. And I see Elise is waiting. Elise, you wanted to add, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, I'm like just new to this today, so I'm holding lots of curiosity. And as there was a few slides back where you had an example in that lower quadrant, and it had me wondering, it felt like you're putting it at a lower stage, and it had me wondering, how could that same behavior actually occur at a higher stage of development? And so, like, when I think about the behavior that is exhibited, it's less about the behavior that defines where they are stage-wise, and it's more about the meaning that comes behind it for me. So it was back a few, it was like, I sit back and I withhold my viewpoint. And if I'm sitting at a lower stage, I might withhold my viewpoint for fear that I'm going to give up my tribe. But if I'm sitting at a higher stage, I might withhold my viewpoint for a different reason, that is protecting something in me. and not the view others have of me. So that was one question that kind of bubbled up for me. Is I wonder if it's not that a stage maps onto each of these quadrants, as opposed to each stage can experience each of these quadrants just differently.
I love it. Oh man, that's interesting. When you were saying something also sparked an idea, is that how much of the story actually, how is the story told? And like I highlighted this slide here, when I'm at extreme and that story comes across so extreme, is this story the story, or is this story just a thing that I'm like able to separate and make myself make able to hold it? Does that make sense? And so there's something there that, you know, I might be feeling extreme feeling, but be able to say, oh, I know what this is. This is a, you know, this is a, you know, and or I might be able to go and say, oh my God, this is what's happening now. This is exactly the thing. So it's like a being able to separate from the story. I don't know. I'm not sure where I'm going with this, but this is very interesting.
I have no idea where you're going with it either. It's interesting to see you go somewhere with it and try to make progress. And I think the thing that it triggers for me was another, on some slide, there was something that just made me wonder, you know, if I'm somebody working with someone with this framework, how much does my own stage influence how I hear their thing and where I want to put them in one of these quadrants to help them make the move to more belonging, or make the move to greater agency, because of the way I'm hearing their story come through.
So it's almost like an interpretation, or being aware of the interpretation I make of the story, of the character itself is a story. Sorry, I'm sorry. I'm like, this is really cool. This is really interesting. Wow, this is really neat. Thank you. That's I'm gonna think about this now for a little bit.
So Elise, just building on your idea, I think it'd be quite fun to work with it almost as a constellation. So that person can identify where they would find themselves. But going back to Dimitri, what you said earlier, if I heard you correctly, it can also be contextual. So where am I? Where's the organization?
Yeah. Yeah. Love it.
So not sure if this builds logically on that, but I'm wondering if we want to make the link to the Enneagram types, if different types wouldn't tell that stories differently, that they would work with the same polarities, but for a type 1, for me, purpose, as if I was a 1, purpose would be making the world a better place. But the way, the safety element, that's the polarity, would be, but is it going to be right? Will I be able to do it perfectly? For the type 2, the purpose story would be purpose, I help other people.
That is so cool.
So different types telling the story, the narrative in a type way.
Oh my God, that is so cool. So are you familiar with Cynefin at all?
Yeah.
Yes.
One of the most interesting things, there's this person called Cynthia Kurtz. I don't know if you know who that is. It's the hidden co-author of Cynefin. So the Snowden guy went on and did the consulting thing, but Cynthia actually has a paper out, or back in 2000 something, and she talked about this idea how Cynefin needs to be built from ground up every time, that you don't actually build it. Like, this is not a framework. It's like you have to go and sit with a group and build it from the ground up, because it will mean different things. The actual access and things will mean different things. And when you started, Marianne, is that the right? When you started mentioning this, I was like, oh my God, that's exactly what it is. It's like, what if there's a, it's going to be different. It's just like maybe a sort of a compass, like I said, a yeast maybe of a framework, but you have to build it. You have to build it, what it means for you in the given space, and
It's
then
a chapter
operate on it
heading.
from the.
You know,
There you
so
go.
like agency for the type 4 would have a different chapter to agency for type 8, but they would both talk a lot about agency.
Wow, that is so cool. That is really cool. Well, that is a very novel insight. I have not thought about this.
That's the developmental part. when I see those 4 quadrants, I'm immediately thinking of Wilber's Aqual framework and the developmental path indicated as concentric circles, which would suggest with development and expansion of every one of those 4 needs or aspects.
Yeah, it's I think sorry,
Yeah.
I'm like, like trying to find the right slide. Yeah, I've been I have a lot of leftover slides that I was like, I don't know what to do here, so I'm just gonna draw some things here. That's amazing. This has been so inspiring. Thank y'all. This is. Are we almost out of time? What's our thingy?
We've got another
Timekeeping thing.
hour if we'd like it. It's up
Say
to
it
you.
again.
We have another hour if you would like it.
I think I can do maybe 15 more minutes or 20 more minutes, and then I have to move on to the start of the day routine.
Okay. Yes, we've got you early.
Glazkov household.
Thank you. Yeah. Great.
So anything y'all want to talk about that's outside of the 4 needs framework? This was just like a little vignette on things. Any questions, any thoughts, any like provocations? I would be very, very interested to chat about.
Dimitri, I would love to hear a little bit more about what you actually do, the teams that you work with.
Can we pause just for a second? And Alistair, this could be a mistake, but I see your hand up and I'm curious if there's something you wanted to bring.
Thank you, Elise.
Thanks. Thanks, Dimitri. I'm pretty new to this development stuff. And my question is about, well, I want a shortcut, right? All I want is belonging. Because the way I understand like the Enneagram is everybody right now is operating from their instincts, right? So in my view, that's safety. Everybody's looking out for themselves. Like in the US now, they've had they call it the Great Resignation. People are just leaving jobs. They want to take care of themselves, right? So how do I create a team ethic, a community based on that model? All I want is belonging. Maybe do you have other resources you could refer us to say to people, listen, we need to regroup and work as a team. Like even the vaccination thing, you've got the vaxxers, the anti-vaxxers, Right now, everybody's looking out for themselves, but how do we form a community around that belonging aspect? Because that's all I'm really concerned about.
Oh, wow, that's a question and a half. So I have bad news. I don't have any good answers. And snappy stuff is not going to happen today. The thing that I've noticed, it's very small scale of Google. As you can imagine, this is a large corporation where there is turf wars and things that happen that sometimes very reminiscent of things that are happening in the world. And in the past and in my experience, there's 2 things that heal those things. And one of them is obviously time. It's just like you need to let people turn over and, and that's not satisfying, but, It's a thing that does seem to work. And the other thing is this idea, if there's people who are able to listen and able to understand and see what a polarity is, even having few individuals who are able to see the polarity and just generally understand that there is irresolvable tension, that it will always be there, that seems to help quite a bit, because you can start forming a very small group of people who are acting as liaisons, with polarity liaisons effectively, who can just now speak and say like, well, you know, yes, but the polarity doesn't have good and bad. Polarity is good and good and bad and bad. It's all about the same, you know, it's an irreconcilable tension. And being able to start to talk and make this a little bit more visible has been the approach that has worked in the past quite a bit. And just being able to just have a general sense of there is a irresolvable tension. This tension is not your fault. This tension is not the fault of the other. This tension is a thing that exists and will exist forever. And it is our job to surf that tension and be and live with it. And that's the part that is, if you are in the context of your organization, if you are capable of finding people who can see it, you are very well equipped to make more changes, because those people can now act as, like I said, like ambassadors or liaisons for these types of ideas, and start advocating for them slowly, quietly. But those things, these make incredible changes in an organization. Just like having a junior engineer thing, if they grasp the idea and be at a meeting and just raise a hand, those types of changes seem to work better than time, slightly more effective than time. Does that help?
Mm.
Okay, somebody else was asking me a question about Google, I think, or something like that.
Lee.
So in a way, you've answered my question. Isn't that wonderful when synchronicity just happens? And I suppose following up from Alistair's question is, you know, so do you spend quite a bit of time explaining to teams the concepts of polarity before you move into the model?
This is very interesting. I would actually characterize myself as a guerrilla organizational developer. I do not reveal what I do, and this is a learned exercise, a learned practice. The Google as a company has aversion toward OD, and in fact, because it's an engineering org, it will not want to see people come in and make changes, or see people and talk about big things, because big things are vacuous and they're weird and they're not something that you can write in code. And so there's this allergic reaction that you have to operate with and understand that it's there. And so my role is less about being like this person who's like, oh, I'm going to help you develop your organization, and more about, oh, I see like there's interesting problem in this technical space, and there is some interesting things that are happening. You would like to make progress here, right? Right. Okay, I'm going to help you make progress in this specific technical problem. But the methods that I apply are actually from a whole different universe, and none for the wiser. And so when I talk about polarities, I usually use very, very specific, you know, this, I'm not going to say like, oh, and there's this thing called polarity, and there's this thing, you know, because that immediately flips the bozo a bit. And so you have to go and say, okay, this thing and this thing, can you see how they're reconcilable? Can you see how this is, you know, that particular tension exists, and you can see how, and so you have to walk through this in a very, very particular way. But that's the shtick that I have, is I'm actually like an engineer. And so I solve technical problems. I don't go and say like, oh, I'm going to fix your organization, or I'm going to be brought in to fix this failing team. That's not the way it works.
Thanks, Dimitri. I think that's really useful as a reminder to us all to work with people where they are and talk the language that they can relate to. So I love that explanation. Thank you.
Very useful. Marlene, were you wanting to ask a question? No. I mean, I've got a million questions and I'm just not sure how to use your time best.
Right.
So I know you have to go. I mean, I'm really interested in what you do in your work. That was like a really useful thing. Don't try and make people what they're not. Don't go in as an OD person. We work in so many technical organizations and we spend a lot of wasted energy trying to convert, for want of a better word, and it's nonsense. And it does kind of suggest that if you're working in those organizations, it's probably better and more credible to have a